The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood quietly by the window of her private study. Her fingers traced the edge of a letter that had arrived just hours before, an invitation that would change everything they had built together over the past decade. The official seal of the Commonwealth diplomatic mission gleamed in the golden light, its weight seeming to press down on her heart with each passing moment. Prince William entered the room with his usual confident stride, but Catherine noticed the slight hesitation in his step when he saw her expression. They had been married long enough for him to read the subtle language of her emotions, the way her shoulders tensed when difficult news arrived, how her eyes seemed to look beyond the present moment when contemplating an uncertain future. He approached slowly, his morning coffee still steaming in the palace china cup that had belonged to his grandmother. The mission briefing came through, Catherine said softly, turning to face him. The letter felt heavier than its physical weight suggested, carrying with it the promise of separation that neither of them had fully prepared for. William set down his cup and moved closer, his presence both comforting and bittersweet in the morning light. They had always known this day might come, the call to serve in separate capacities, to fulfill duties that would stretch across continents and time zones. The Commonwealth had requested Catherine to lead a humanitarian delegation to Southeast Asia, a 6-month commitment that would take her through remote villages and bustling cities where her advocacy for children's mental health could make a real difference. It was everything she had worked toward. Every speech and charity gala and carefully planned public appearance had been building to this moment of genuine impact. Yet the thought of leaving William behind in London, managing royal duties and public expectations on his own, created a hollow ache in her chest. William reached for the letter, his eyes scanning the formal language that outlined travel schedules, security protocols, and diplomatic objectives. Catherine watched his face as he read, noting the proud smile that flickered across his features despite the obvious concern in his eyes. He had always been her strongest supporter, encouraging her to pursue meaningful work even when it meant personal sacrifice for both of them. This mission represented the culmination of years of preparation and dedication to causes that mattered deeply to her. "This is incredible, Catherine," he said finally, setting the letter aside and taking her hands in his. "The villages they're asking you to visit, some of them have never had access to mental health resources. You could change lives." His words carried genuine enthusiasm, but Catherine could hear the underlying note of resignation. They both understood the magnitude of what lay ahead. Not just the professional opportunity, but the personal cost of extended separation. The palace around them seemed unusually quiet that morning, as if even the staff sensed the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Through the windows, they could see the carefully manicured gardens where they had walked countless times, discussing everything from state dinners to private dreams for their future. Those familiar paths would soon know only one set of footsteps, at least for the months ahead. Catherine leaned against William's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the subtle fragrance of the roses blooming just outside their window. They had faced challenges before: media scrutiny, family pressures, the constant balance between public duty and private happiness. But this felt different. This was a choice they were making together, even though it would pull them apart. "I keep thinking about the children we might help," Catherine murmured against his shirt. "Some of them have never spoken to anyone about their struggles. If this mission could create just one safe space, one moment where a child feels heard and understood." Her voice trailed off, but William could feel the passion in her words. It was the same dedication that had drawn him to her years ago, watching her transform from a university student into a woman who genuinely cared about making the world better. The morning light shifted as clouds passed overhead, casting the room in gentle shadows that seemed to mirror their mixed emotions. William's arms tightened around her, as if he could hold on to this moment and stretch it into something permanent. They both knew that accepting this mission was the right choice, but knowing something intellectually and feeling prepared for it emotionally were entirely different challenges. "We'll make it work," William said quietly, his chin resting on top of her head. "Video calls, letters, counting down the days until you come home." They had discussed the practicalities many times, but speaking them aloud made the separation feel more real and immediate. Catherine nodded against his chest, drawing strength from his certainty even as her own heart wrestled with doubt and excitement in equal measure. As the morning progressed around them, The weight of their decision settled into a quiet determination. Catherine would accept the mission, and William would support her completely, just as they had always supported each other through the unique challenges of their royal life. The letter on the desk represented not just a professional opportunity, but a test of the foundation they had built together: trust, communication, and unwavering commitment to both their shared future and their individual purposes. The palace bells chimed the hour, reminding them that duty called even in moments of personal reflection. Soon there would be phone calls to make, schedules to coordinate, and the careful process of preparing for a separation that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love and distance. But for now they stood together in the golden morning light, holding on to each other in the quiet certainty that some bonds grow stronger when tested by time and space. 3 weeks later, the palace had transformed into a hub of careful preparation and barely contained emotion. Catherine's private secretary had filled her calendar with briefings, language lessons, and cultural orientation sessions that would prepare her for the delicate diplomatic work ahead. Her wardrobe choices alone required hours of consideration. Each outfit needed to respect local customs while maintaining the dignity expected of British royalty, a balance that required input from cultural experts and fashion consultants working in careful coordination. William found himself memorizing small details about Catherine's daily routines, things he had never consciously noticed during their years together. The way she hummed softly while arranging flowers from the palace gardens, how she always checked the locks on their bedroom door twice before settling in for the night, the particular way she folded her reading glasses and placed them on the nightstand. These ordinary moments had become precious, tinged with the awareness that they would soon exist only in memory. The children's reaction to the news had been mixed, reflecting their different ages and understanding of royal duty. Their eldest had asked thoughtful questions about the mission's purpose, while the younger ones focused more on practical concerns like bedtime stories and who would help with homework. Catherine spent extra time with each child, creating special rituals and recording voice messages they could play when missing her became overwhelming. William watched these preparations with a mixture of admiration and heartache, seeing how naturally Catherine balanced her roles as mother and humanitarian. Security briefings became a daily occurrence, with protection officers outlining protocols for environments vastly different from the controlled settings of London. Catherine would be traveling to regions where infrastructure was limited, communications unreliable, and medical facilities hours away from her destinations. The security team's concerns were legitimate, but Catherine remained focused on the mission's humanitarian goals, rather than dwelling on potential risks. During quiet evenings, William and Catherine developed new traditions to bridge the coming separation. They started writing in a shared journal, taking turns to record thoughts, observations, and promises for the future. William's entries often focused on palace events and family news, while Catherine wrote about her hopes for the communities she would visit and her determination to make a meaningful difference. The journal became a tangible connection they could both contribute to, even when continents apart. The media attention intensified as Catherine's departure date approached. Royal correspondents analyzed every public appearance for signs of marital strain or professional tension, creating narratives that bore little resemblance to the reality of their relationship. William and Catherine had learned to navigate media speculation with grace and humor, but the constant scrutiny added an extra layer of pressure to an already emotional situation. Catherine's final fittings for her mission wardrobe took place in the palace's private dressing room, surrounded by garments that reflected months of cultural research and diplomatic consideration. Each piece had been chosen to convey respect for the countries she would visit, while maintaining the polished appearance expected of royal representatives. As she stood before the mirror in clothes designed for a life temporarily separate from William's, the reality of their approaching separation crystallized into something sharp and immediate. William began preparing for his expanded responsibilities during Catherine's absence. State dinners would require different planning, without his wife's intuitive understanding of social dynamics. Public engagements would need careful scheduling to maintain the royal family's visibility, while managing increased media attention about Catherine's mission. The private secretary's office worked overtime to create systems that would support both William's duties in London and Catherine's work abroad. Letters arrived daily from organizations and individuals, expressing support for Catherine's mission, Children from schools across Britain sent drawings and messages. Elderly residents of care homes shared stories of their own experiences with separation during wartime, and mental health professionals offered insights about the communities she would visit. These expressions of support reinforced Catherine's conviction that the mission was worth the personal sacrifice it required. The palace staff noticed subtle changes in the royal couple's behavior as departure day approached. William became more attentive to household details, learning routines that Catherine typically managed. She began delegating responsibilities with detailed notes and explanations, ensuring continuity in everything from charity work to personal correspondence. Their interactions carried an intensity born of knowing that ordinary moments were becoming precious and finite. Evening walks through the palace gardens became sacred time for William and Catherine, opportunities to talk through concerns and share hopes without the constant presence of staff and advisors. They discussed practical matters like communication schedules and emergency protocols, but also deeper questions about how their relationship would evolve during the separation. These conversations strengthened their confidence in the foundation they had built together, while acknowledging the challenges ahead. Catherine's mother visited frequently during the final weeks, offering practical support and emotional wisdom gained from her own experience with difficult separations. The extended family rallied around William and Catherine, understanding that royal duty sometimes demanded sacrifices that tested even the strongest relationships. These family connections provided comfort and reassurance that they would have support systems in place during the months ahead. The final security briefing took place in the palace's most secure conference room, with protection officers from both Britain and the destination countries participating via encrypted video calls. Catherine listened carefully to protocols and procedures, asking detailed questions about communication systems and emergency evacuation plans. William's presence during these briefings provided emotional support, while reinforcing his own understanding of the risks Catherine would face. As the last week before departure began, William and Catherine moved through their final preparations with a mixture of excitement and apprehension that seemed to intensify with each passing day. The mission represented everything Catherine had worked toward in her royal career, but leaving William and their children required courage that went beyond any public appearance or diplomatic challenge she had previously faced. Together, they were about to test whether love could truly transcend distance and time, armed with nothing but faith in each other and the strength of the bond they had spent years building together. The departure morning arrived with unseasonable rain clouds gathering over London, as if nature itself recognized the gravity of the day ahead. Catherine woke before dawn, her internal clock already adjusting to the time zone she would soon inhabit. She moved quietly through their bedroom, gathering the last few personal items that would accompany her on the journey. A small framed photograph of their family, William's favorite book of poetry that he had insisted she take, and a simple gold bracelet that had belonged to his mother. William found her in the kitchen much earlier than usual, standing by the window with a cup of tea that had grown cold in her hands. The palace was still quiet around them, giving them these precious final hours of normalcy before the official departure procedures began. He approached slowly, understanding that she needed space to process the magnitude of what lay ahead while also wanting to offer comfort during these last private moments. Together, "I keep thinking about the first village on my itinerary," Catherine said softly, not turning from the window. The briefing mentioned children who have never had access to any kind of counseling or mental health support. Some of them have been carrying trauma for years with no outlet, no one who understands. Her voice carried the passionate concern that had driven her advocacy work, but William could hear the underlying emotion of someone about to leave everything familiar behind. The children woke gradually, their usual morning routines tinged with an unusual solemnity that reflected the household's emotional state. Catherine spent extra time with each child, helping them prepare for school while creating small rituals they could repeat during her absence. She tucked handwritten notes into their lunchboxes, promised to call at specific times that would work across time zones, and reminded them of the important work they were helping her accomplish by being brave during their separation. William handled breakfast preparations with unusual attention to detail, memorizing the way Catherine liked her toast prepared and the specific way she arranged fruit on the children's plates. These domestic rituals that had become automatic over years of marriage now carried special significance, small acts of love that would need to sustain them across continents and time zones. He found himself taking mental photographs of ordinary moments, storing them away for the lonely days ahead. The official departure procedures began at mid-morning, with security teams conducting final equipment checks and diplomatic staff reviewing last-minute protocol adjustments. Catherine's luggage had been carefully packed and inspected, containing everything from formal diplomatic attire to practical clothing suitable for village visits in remote areas. Each item had been chosen with careful consideration for the environments she would encounter and the impression she needed to make as a representative of both the royal family and humanitarian values. Media crews gathered outside the palace gates, their presence a reminder that this departure would be witnessed by millions around the world. Royal correspondents had spent weeks analyzing the significance of Catherine's mission, some praising her commitment to meaningful humanitarian work, while others questioned the wisdom of such an extended separation. William and Catherine had learned to ignore external commentary, focusing instead on their own understanding of duty and purpose. The final family breakfast took place in their private dining room, surrounded by portraits of previous generations who had faced their own challenges and separations in service to crown and country. The conversation remained deliberately light, focusing on school activities and weekend plans rather than dwelling on the approaching goodbye. This normalcy felt both comforting and surreal, an ordinary family meal taking place in extraordinary circumstances. Catherine's lady-in-waiting arrived with final wardrobe adjustments and diplomatic correspondence that had come through overnight channels. The mission's schedule remained fluid, dependent on weather conditions, local political situations, and community needs that could only be assessed upon arrival. This uncertainty added complexity to an already emotional situation, making it impossible to predict exactly when meaningful communication would be possible during the early days of Catherine's deployment. William retreated to his study for final security briefings, receiving encrypted communication devices and emergency protocols that would keep him informed of Catherine's movements without compromising operational security. The technology felt both reassuring and inadequate, sophisticated enough to maintain contact across vast distances but utterly incapable of bridging the emotional gap that separation would create. The palace staff moved through their duties with unusual quiet efficiency, understanding the significance of the day while maintaining the professional discretion that royal households required. Many of them had worked with Catherine for years, watching her grow into her role and develop the skills that made this mission possible. Their support felt especially meaningful as she prepared to represent not just the royal family but the values and compassion of everyone who had contributed to her development as a humanitarian leader. Final diplomatic pouches arrived containing cultural gifts for community leaders, medical supplies for remote clinics, and educational materials that would support Catherine's work with children and families. Each item represented careful research and consultation with local experts, ensuring that her mission would provide genuine assistance rather than symbolic gestures. The weight of these supplies seemed to anchor the mission's purpose in concrete action rather than abstract ideals. Catherine's personal chaplain arrived for a private blessing, offering prayers for safety, wisdom, and the strength needed to fulfill her humanitarian calling while maintaining the spiritual foundation that had always guided her public service. This spiritual preparation felt essential as she contemplated the challenges ahead, not just the physical demands of travel and work in difficult conditions, but the emotional challenge of representing hope and healing for communities while missing her own family intensely. The morning progressed with mechanical precision despite the emotional undercurrents that affected everyone involved in the departure preparations. William found himself watching Catherine with intense focus, memorizing the way she moved through familiar spaces and handled both practical tasks and emotional moments. Soon these observations would exist only in memory, sustaining him through the months until her return. As the departure time approached, the weight of their decision settled over the palace like the gathering storm clouds outside. Catherine had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of mission, but leaving William and their children required a different kind of courage than any diplomatic challenge or public appearance. Together, they moved toward the final moments of their life as it had been, trusting that their love was strong enough to survive the test of distance and time that lay ahead. The motorcade arrived precisely at noon, its black vehicles gleaming despite the persistent London drizzle that had continued throughout the morning. Catherine stood at their bedroom window one final time, looking out over the gardens where she and William had shared countless conversations about duty, love, and the delicate balance between personal happiness and public service. The familiar view seemed different now, charged with the knowledge that it would exist only in memory for the months ahead. William joined her at the window, his presence both comforting and heartbreaking as they shared these final private moments. Neither spoke, understanding that words felt inadequate for expressing the complexity of emotions surrounding their separation. The silence between them was rich with years of shared experiences, unspoken understanding, and the deep trust that had carried them through every challenge their royal life had presented. The security detail's quiet knock interrupted their reflection, signaling that departure procedures could no longer be delayed. Catherine gathered her personal items with steady hands despite the emotional storm she felt inside. The small bag contained items chosen for their ability to provide comfort during difficult moments: photographs, letters William had written for her to open at specific times during the mission, and small mementos from their children that would remind her of home during the loneliest nights. They walked through the palace corridors together, past portraits of previous generations who had faced their own trials and separations in service to duty. The familiar paintings seemed to watch their progress with understanding, silent witnesses to the ongoing story of sacrifice and commitment that defined royal life. Their footsteps echoed in the grand hallways, creating a rhythm that would soon exist only in memory. The palace staff lined the main corridor in an informal farewell ceremony, their presence both touching and bittersweet. These were the people who had supported Catherine's development as a humanitarian leader, who had worked late into countless nights preparing for the mission that was now becoming reality. Their faces reflected pride in her accomplishments mixed with genuine concern for the family they served with such dedication. Catherine moved down the line of staff members, offering personal words of gratitude and reassurance to each person who had contributed to making the mission possible. The head housekeeper received special thanks for managing household arrangements that would support William and the children during her absence. The private secretary was acknowledged for the countless hours spent coordinating diplomatic protocols and cultural research that had prepared Catherine for the challenges ahead. William's private secretary handed him final communication schedules and emergency contact information, ensuring that he would remain informed of Catherine's progress throughout the mission. The arrangements felt both comprehensive and inadequate, sophisticated enough to maintain contact across vast distances but utterly incapable of replacing physical presence and immediate emotional support during difficult moments. The children appeared from their morning lessons, having been prepared for this moment, but still struggling with the reality of their mother's departure. Catherine knelt to their level, offering final hugs and whispered promises about communication schedules and the important work she would accomplish with their support. Their brave faces reflected the royal training they had received about duty and service, but their eyes showed the natural sadness of children facing separation from their mother. William watched these final family interactions with a mixture of pride and heartache, seeing how naturally Catherine balanced her roles as mother and humanitarian leader. Her ability to comfort the children while maintaining focus on the mission's importance demonstrated the skills that made her effective in public service. These qualities that he admired in her professional work now created both emotional difficulty and reassurance about her capability to handle the challenges ahead. The palace doors opened to reveal the waiting motorcade, its presence making the departure feel immediate and irreversible. Media crews maintained respectful distance while documenting this historic moment, understanding that they were witnessing something significant in the evolution of royal humanitarian work. The coverage would reach millions around the world, but William and Catherine remained focused on their private goodbye rather than external attention. Security officers conducted final equipment checks while diplomatic staff reviewed last-minute adjustments to the mission schedule. The professional efficiency of these preparations provided structure for an emotionally challenging moment, giving everyone specific tasks to focus on, rather than dwelling on the emotional weight of separation. Catherine appreciated the distraction of practical details that required her attention and decision-making skills. The rain had intensified, creating a dramatic backdrop for the departure that seemed to mirror the emotional complexity of the moment. William opened an umbrella to shelter Catherine as they walked toward the waiting vehicle, their final steps together across the palace courtyard, feeling both eternal and far too brief. The sound of their footsteps on wet cobblestones created a rhythm that would echo in both their memories during the difficult months ahead. At the vehicle door, they paused for their final private exchange, words spoken too quietly for anyone else to hear, despite the assembled staff and security personnel. William's hands on Catherine's shoulders provided stability and reassurance, while her fingers briefly touched the wedding ring that would remain her closest connection to home throughout the mission. Their love had grown strong enough to survive separation, but saying goodbye still required courage that went beyond any public appearance or diplomatic challenge. Catherine entered the vehicle with grace and determination, her posture reflecting the confidence that had been built through years of preparation for exactly this kind of humanitarian leadership. William remained in the palace doorway as the motorcade began moving, his figure growing smaller in the rear window but remaining visible until the last possible moment. The security convoy moved through London streets toward Heathrow Airport, carrying Catherine toward the mission that represented the culmination of her humanitarian development and the greatest personal challenge their marriage had yet faced. The palace gates closed behind the departing motorcade, leaving William alone with the children and staff who would support the family during Catherine's absence. The familiar spaces around them felt different now, charged with expectation and the quiet hope that love could indeed transcend distance and time. The mission had begun, carrying Catherine toward communities that needed her expertise while testing the foundation of trust and commitment that she and William had spent years building together. 3 months into Catherine's mission, communication had settled into a precious routine that bridged 12 time zones and vastly different worlds. Her video calls arrived during William's early morning hours, when London was quiet and Catherine had finished her evening work in remote villages, where internet connectivity was limited, but reliable enough for their treasured conversations. These digital meetings became the anchor points around which both their lives revolved, offering glimpses into experiences that words alone could barely convey. Catherine's face on the screen carried evidence of her immersive work, a deeper tan from long days in tropical sun, eyes that reflected both exhaustion and fulfillment from challenging humanitarian efforts, and a confidence that had grown stronger through months of independent decision-making in complex situations. She spoke about children who had begun opening up about trauma for the first time, village leaders who were implementing new mental health awareness programs, and small victories that were creating ripple effects throughout entire communities. William found himself transformed by the experience of managing royal duties, alone while supporting Catherine's mission from afar. His public appearances carried new depth and authenticity as he spoke about the importance of humanitarian work and the courage required for meaningful service. The separation had taught him to appreciate Catherine's contributions to their partnership in ways he had never fully understood when they worked side by side every day. The children had adapted to their mother's absence with resilience that both surprised and impressed their father. They had learned to calculate time zone differences, understand video call schedules, and take pride in explaining their mother's important work to curious classmates and teachers. Their bedroom walls now featured maps marking Catherine's travels and photographs she sent of the communities where she was working, creating visual connections to her mission that helped bridge the physical distance. Catherine's daily experiences challenged every assumption she had held about her own capabilities and the nature of effective humanitarian work. Living in basic accommodations, working without the usual support systems of royal life, and navigating cultural complexities without familiar advisors had stripped away everything except her core commitment to helping vulnerable children and families. The simplicity of this focus had brought unexpected clarity and strength to her sense of purpose. Village elders in the remote communities where Catherine worked had begun treating her not as visiting royalty, but as a trusted colleague who understood their challenges and offered practical solutions. Her willingness to participate in local customs, learn basic phrases in regional languages, and adapt her approach to fit community needs had earned respect that transcended her official title. These relationships represented everything she had hoped to achieve through humanitarian service. William's letters arrived regularly through diplomatic pouches, their handwritten pages carrying news from London and emotional support that sustained Catherine through the most difficult aspects of her mission. He wrote about palace events and family activities, but also about his growing understanding of her work and his admiration for the courage she demonstrated daily. These letters became treasured possessions that Catherine read repeatedly during lonely evenings in remote locations. The media coverage of Catherine's mission had evolved from initial skepticism about royal humanitarian efforts to genuine respect for the substantive work being accomplished. Journalists who had been granted access to her mission sites reported stories of real change and community empowerment that went far beyond symbolic gestures. This validation of her approach reinforced Catherine's conviction that the personal sacrifice of separation was producing meaningful results. Technical challenges with communication equipment had taught both William and Catherine to treasure every successful connection while learning to cope with periods of silence when contact was impossible. These enforced communication breaks had strengthened their individual resilience, while making their successful conversations feel even more precious. They had learned to compress days of experience into brief exchanges that conveyed maximum emotional and practical information. Catherine's security detail had become a second family. During her extended deployment, sharing meals in village community centers and adapting to living conditions that were far removed from typical royal protection protocols. Their flexibility and professional commitment had enabled Catherine to work effectively in environments where traditional security arrangements would have been impossible. This collaboration had created bonds of mutual respect and shared purpose that enriched the entire mission experience. Local mental health professionals who worked alongside Catherine had begun implementing programs that would continue long after her departure, ensuring that her mission would create lasting change rather than temporary assistance. Training sessions she conducted for community health workers were being replicated in neighboring villages, creating networks of support that extended the mission's impact far beyond her direct involvement. This sustainability represented the most meaningful measure of her humanitarian success. William's video calls often found Catherine in community centers or village gathering places, surrounded by children and families who had become comfortable with her presence among them. These glimpses into her daily work environment showed him a side of Catherine that had always existed, but flourished in the freedom and responsibility of independent humanitarian leadership. Her natural warmth and genuine concern for others had found perfect expression in this mission environment. The approaching halfway point of Catherine's mission created mixed emotions for both William and the communities where she was working. Her progress reports indicated significant achievements in establishing mental health support systems, but the thought of leaving relationships and projects that had become deeply meaningful created its own emotional complexity. The success of her work made the eventual return to London feel both eagerly anticipated and bittersweet. On evening walks through the palace gardens had become William's time for reflection and connection with Catherine's mission. Even when communication was impossible, he often carried his phone, hoping for unexpected calls that might come through when technical conditions allowed brief contact. These quiet moments in familiar surroundings helped him process the pride, loneliness, and anticipation that had become constant companions during Catherine's absence. The transformation in both William and Catherine had become apparent to everyone around them. Staff members noted William's increased confidence in independent decision-making, while Catherine's mission reports reflected growing expertise in humanitarian leadership that would influence her royal work for years to come. Their separation was proving that individual growth could strengthen rather than weaken the partnership they had built together, creating new dimensions of respect and understanding that would enrich their relationship when reunion finally became possible. The final month of Catherine's mission arrived with unexpected intensity, as communities throughout the region had begun requesting her assistance. Word of her effective humanitarian work having spread far beyond the original planned locations. Local officials were asking her to extend the mission, recognizing that her approach to mental health advocacy was creating unprecedented positive change in areas where such resources had never existed. The possibility of staying longer created a profound dilemma that touched every aspect of her commitment to both service and family. William received news of the extension request through encrypted diplomatic channels, his heart torn between pride in Catherine's achievements and longing for her return to London. The success of her mission represented everything they had hoped for when she first accepted the humanitarian assignment. But the thought of additional months of separation felt almost unbearable after managing royal duties and family responsibilities alone for so long. His response would require balancing personal needs against the greater good that Catherine's continued presence could accomplish. Catherine found herself in remote villages where children who had never spoken about traumatic experiences were beginning to trust the support systems she had helped establish. Teenage girls were attending school for the first time in years, their confidence restored through counseling programs that addressed anxiety and depression. Mothers who had struggled with postpartum depression and isolation were connecting with support networks that provided both practical assistance and emotional understanding. Walking away from these relationships felt impossible, yet staying meant postponing reunion with her own family indefinitely. The children back in London had been counting down days until their mother's return, their bedroom calendar marked with special symbols for each week that brought her homecoming closer. News that the mission might be extended created confusion and disappointment that William struggled to address while maintaining enthusiasm for their mother's important work. Family video calls became more emotional as the children expressed both pride in Catherine's achievements and frustration with her continued absence. Village leaders where Catherine was working had begun planning farewell ceremonies that reflected the deep respect and gratitude her presence had generated throughout the community she served. Traditional dances were being prepared, artwork was being created by children she had counseled, and community gardens were being planted in her honor. These expressions of appreciation demonstrated the profound impact her work had achieved, but they also highlighted the personal connections that made departure emotionally complex. William's private conversations with senior palace officials explored the precedent that Catherine's mission extension might establish for future royal humanitarian work. Her success was generating international recognition that brought positive attention to British humanitarian leadership, but it also raised questions about how long royal family members could commit to overseas service without disrupting domestic duties and family stability. These discussions required weighing institutional needs against personal circumstances. Catherine's mission reports had begun influencing mental health policy discussions at international development organizations, with her field observations providing insights that could shape humanitarian assistance programs worldwide. Academic researchers were requesting access to her documentation of successful interventions, recognizing that her work represented a significant advancement in understanding how mental health support could be effectively delivered in resource-limited settings. The implications of her work extended far beyond the immediate communities she served. Security assessments for a potential mission extension revealed increasing risks as Catherine's presence had become widely known throughout the region. While community support remained overwhelmingly positive, her visibility as a high-profile humanitarian leader had attracted attention from groups opposed to foreign influence in local affairs. Protection officers were recommending either immediate departure or significantly enhanced security measures that would limit her direct community contact. The diplomatic implications of Catherine's mission extension request required coordination between multiple government agencies and international partners who had supported the original humanitarian deployment. Foreign Office officials were balancing the positive impact of her continued presence against the precedent it might establish for future royal family overseas commitments. Parliamentary questions were being raised about the appropriate duration and scope of royal humanitarian missions. Catherine's evening calls with William had become more emotionally charged as they discussed the extension possibility, both struggling to balance their personal longing for reunion against the clear evidence that her continued presence could save lives and strengthen communities. Their conversations explored every aspect of the decision: practical considerations like family needs and royal duties, moral questions about service and sacrifice, and the long-term implications for their relationship and individual growth. Medical clinics in the region had reported significant improvements in mental health treatment outcomes, directly attributed to training programs Catherine had established with local healthcare workers. Suicide rates had decreased measurably in villages where her support systems were functioning, while school attendance had increased as children received help processing trauma that had previously made learning impossible. These concrete results provided compelling evidence for the mission's extension, while highlighting the weight of responsibility Catherine felt toward the communities depending on her leadership. International humanitarian organizations had begun requesting meetings with Catherine to discuss replicating her approach in other regions where mental health resources were inadequate or non-existent. Her methods were being studied as potential models for cultural sensitivity and community engagement that could transform how humanitarian assistance was delivered globally. The professional recognition represented career-defining opportunities that came with their own pressures and expectations. William's management of royal duties during Catherine's absence had earned respect from palace staff and government officials, who had witnessed his growth as an independent leader. His public appearances carried new authority and emotional depth that reflected lessons learned through separation and single parenting. The experience had revealed capabilities and strengths that might have remained undeveloped if Catherine had remained in London, creating unexpected personal and professional benefits from their time apart. The approaching decision deadline created sleepless nights for both William and Catherine, as they weighed factors that seemed impossible to reconcile through logic alone. Their love had proven strong enough to survive months of separation, but the choice between service and reunion would test their relationship in new ways. Video calls became planning sessions where they explored every option while acknowledging that some decisions could only be made through faith in their understanding of what mattered most to both their individual purposes and their shared future. Community farewell preparations continued despite uncertainty about Catherine's departure date, with village children creating gifts they hoped to present before she left. Their artwork depicted the changes her presence had brought to their lives: smiling faces where sadness had once dominated, hands reaching out in friendship rather than isolation, bright colors replacing the dark themes that had characterized their earlier expressions. These visual testimonies to her impact created powerful reminders of why the mission had been undertaken and what might be lost if she departed too soon. The decision came to Catherine in the quiet hours before dawn, while she sat in a village community center where she had spent countless evenings listening to stories of healing and hope. Surrounded by artwork created by children she had helped counsel through trauma, reading letters from families whose lives had been transformed by mental health support systems that would continue long after her departure, she finally understood that her mission's greatest success lay not in her continued presence but in the sustainable programs she had helped establish. Her final video call with William took place against the backdrop of a spectacular sunrise that painted the simple room in golden light, creating an almost sacred atmosphere for their most important conversation. Catherine's face on the screen carried a peace that had been absent during weeks of difficult deliberation, her decision evident before she spoke the words that would bring her home. William's relief was immediate and overwhelming, his own smile reflecting months of patient support finally rewarded with the news he had hardly dared to hope for. "I'm coming home," Catherine said simply, her voice carrying both the sadness of leaving meaningful work and the joy of approaching reunion. "The programs are strong enough to continue without me, and the local leaders have the training and resources they need. It's time." William's response came through tears he had been holding back for weeks, his gratitude expressed in words that conveyed both personal relief and professional pride in what Catherine had accomplished during their separation. The final weeks of Catherine's mission became a whirlwind of transition activities as she worked with local partners to ensure continued success of mental health programs that had begun transforming entire communities. Training sessions intensified as she shared everything she had learned about effective intervention techniques, cultural sensitivity, and sustainable program development. Her departure would mark the end of direct royal involvement, but the beginning of locally led initiatives that could expand throughout the region. Farewell ceremonies in each village where Catherine had worked reflected the deep emotional connections she had formed with families and community leaders who had trusted her with their most vulnerable members. Traditional dances honored her contribution while expressing hope for continued healing and growth within communities that had rediscovered their capacity for supporting mental health and emotional well-being. These celebrations demonstrated the profound cultural exchange that had occurred. Alongside the humanitarian work, William's preparation for Catherine's return involved more than logistics and scheduling. He found himself emotionally preparing for reunion with someone who had been transformed by months of intensive humanitarian service. Their video calls had shown him glimpses of Catherine's growth, but he anticipated that full appreciation of her development would come only through extended time together. His own changes during her absence would similarly require adjustment as they rebuilt their partnership. The children's excitement about their mother's return created a festive atmosphere throughout the palace as they planned surprises and prepared questions about her. Adventures in distant villages. Their understanding of Catherine's work had deepened during her absence, transforming abstract concepts about royal duty into concrete appreciation for humanitarian service that made real differences in people's lives. Their pride in her accomplishments balanced their joy at her approaching return. International recognition of Catherine's mission success had begun, generating requests for her to speak at humanitarian conferences and advise other organizations, planning similar community-based mental health initiatives. Her field experience had created expertise that was rare among royal family members, opening possibilities for continued humanitarian leadership that could complement her traditional royal duties. These opportunities represented potential future service that could honor both her professional development and family commitment. Security arrangements for Catherine's return journey involved careful coordination to ensure her safe passage through multiple countries while accommodating media interest in documenting the conclusion of her successful mission. Royal protection officers who had served throughout her deployment shared in the satisfaction of completing a complex assignment that had achieved humanitarian goals while maintaining the safety and dignity required for royal family members working in challenging environments. Catherine's final night in the field was spent in the first village where her mission had begun, sharing a simple meal with families who had become like relatives during months of shared work and mutual support. Children who had been withdrawn and traumatized when she arrived now demonstrated confidence and joy that reflected successful treatment and community support. Their transformation represented everything she had hoped to accomplish through humanitarian service. The departure from her final mission location took place at dawn, with community members gathering to offer traditional blessings for her journey home and continuing prayers for her family's well-being. Catherine's tears reflected both sadness at leaving people she had grown to love and anticipation of reunion with William and their children. The emotional complexity of her departure captured the depth of relationships that had developed through shared commitment to healing and hope. William stood in the same palace doorway where he had watched Catherine leave 6 months earlier, but this time his vigil was joyful rather than sorrowful, as he waited for the motorcade that would bring her home. The children beside him could barely contain their excitement, having prepared welcome signs and planned special activities to celebrate their mother's return. The palace staff shared in the family's anticipation, proud of the successful mission and eager to welcome Catherine back to London. The reunion took place in the privacy of the palace courtyard, away from media attention and public scrutiny that would have intruded on such a deeply personal moment. Catherine emerged from the vehicle transformed by her experience but unmistakably herself, her smile radiant with the joy of homecoming and the satisfaction of meaningful work completed. William's embrace lasted long enough to bridge months of separation, while their children waited impatiently for their turn to welcome their mother home. In that embrace, witnessed only by loyal staff who had supported both their separation and reunion, William and Catherine discovered that their love had indeed proven stronger than distance and time. The months apart had taught them to value each other in new ways while building individual strength that enriched their partnership. Their farewell embrace 6 months earlier had represented courage and faith in their relationship. This reunion embrace confirmed that some bonds grow stronger when tested by sacrifice and service. The quiet tears they both shed as they held each other reflected not sadness but overwhelming gratitude for love that had survived separation, work that had created lasting change, and the profound privilege of sharing their lives in service to purposes greater than themselves. Their story had proven that duty and devotion could coexist, that individual growth could strengthen rather than weaken partnership, and that the silent moments between two people who truly understand each other could indeed touch hearts around the world.